Alright, so in today's video, I'm going to be going over a quick leak guide. So there's several reasons why you may see leaks in your ceilings, and I'm going to knock out some of the best things that you can do as a homeowner to try and do a process of elimination to see if you can figure out why that leak is occurring instead of jumping to a certain conclusion or potentially having to call somebody out that's going to cost you money just for an overall inspection. The topics I'm going to be reviewing today in the quick leak guide is going to be gutter backflow, HVAC and condensation, a roof leak, flashing leaks, chimney leaks. So first one I'm going to go over is if it is a gutter leak. So there's a couple ways that this can occur. This can be found shockingly not just on exterior walls, but also on interior walls as well. An example that I'll give you is one that I looked at earlier this week where the gutter guards and the gutter were actually backflowing into the roof. So what was happening is in certain cases where the gutter gets clogged, it can backflow back behind the gutter, especially if you don't have something called drip edge. Or also, like in this scenario, there was no downspout on the gutter and the gutter was actually sloped back towards the roof. So what was happening was, because the gutter was sloped towards the roof, when that water came down that slope, fell in that gutter, it flowed into the roof, and then there was no way for it to properly drain off the roof. So all that water was just pounding the shingles. And while yes, shingles are meant to shed water, it's not meant to shed water from a bunch of different sources and at such a high rate, especially if you have a really steep slope roof. So that backflow in combination of some of the debris starting to build up on one of the gutter guards was actually causing it to leak. Yes, I said with gutter guards, the backflow was so bad that it actually started to leak into the house and down one of the walls in the center. So that's one of the occurrences that can actually happen. This is going to be a good bit harder to diagnose. This is maybe something you may not be able to figure out yourself as a homeowner, especially if you don't have a drone to fly over top or if it's in an area that you can't really tell where the leak is inside the attic. Next, I'm going to go into just a classic roof leak. So there's several reasons why your roof can be leaking. It can be anything from a pipe boot, which is a very, very common occurrence, especially if it's a slightly older roof. The sealant around the nail heads is worn off. That can definitely lead to slow leaks. If one of the shingles is blown off, this is going to be a much more obvious source of a leak. And this is going to be usually pretty easy to identify by just walking around the home. If you don't already, I advise walking around the home pretty much whenever the weather changes. So every 6 months, just taking a good lap around the home and just doing an overall check if you can. Obviously, if you have a roof that's too steep, if you have drone, that's great. If not, an annual inspection may not be a bad idea in your scenario. Well, another source that can be a leak is going to be something called a nail pop. A nail pop is a very, very common occurrence. There's a few reasons why it can occur. It can be due to improper installation where the nail was driven not on a nailing strip on a shingle that's supposed to hold it down. It can also happen just because of pure expansion and contraction. When it gets hot to cold, cold to hot, that nail can slowly start to back out and it pops through the face of the shingle, leading to some slow leaks. Now, there's a bunch of other things as far as the different components, but these are going to be your three main reasons where I see the most common roof leaks that come from. With that noted, there is something called wind-driven rain. This is something that only occurs when, as you guessed it, you have really, really high winds. So if it's a really, really bad storm and all of a sudden you have leaks, but during no other times of the year you have leaks, it probably is something called wind-driven rain. This is something where you just want to keep an eye out on the area. If there's something you can do to prevent it, that's great. Not always going to be the case. Sometimes this stuff occurs just when you have high winds, but because it's a pretty unusual case, it's usually manageable. Next is going to be condensation. This is something where I've looked at a couple leaks over the last couple weeks, especially because we're going from a hot season into the cold season. People are turning on their furnaces. What I experienced recently was there was a leak that was coming down a wall, and when I went up in the attic, what I found was one of the furnace pipes, there was a slight gap in one of the connection points, and what was happening is it's getting so cold in the attic, and now that there's so much heat running through that pipe, it was condensating on the inside of the pipe, and in one of those connection points, it built up enough condensation to where it actually dropped toward the bottom, and then that drop followed all the way down that pipe, all the way down where it finally landed on in the wall. Stuff like this is going to be pretty hard to diagnose. I'm going to throw a couple pictures up, that way you can kind of get an eye out for it. And what you're going to be looking for is some kind of staining from when it dries, because obviously the heat's not going to be running 24/7, especially not in Georgia, really only the overnights and then kind of slow and steady throughout the day. But when it's really pumping, you can see the stains on the bottom side of the pipe, and that was what was able to lead me to the source of the leak. So this is something you're going to want to pay attention to, and it's going to be very timely. So if this is something that pops up right after the weather changes and you say, oh, I did just turn on the furnace, that's probably going to be a pretty probable cause. In my scenario where I went and looked at, we had just replaced the roof before, so it was also very logical in thinking that, hey, they just replaced the roof, it's kind of uncanny, maybe that's also the source of the leak, which don't blame them there. Next is going to be the chimney and the flashing. So as far as a chimney goes, it really depends on where the leak is coming from inside the home. If you're looking at your mantle and the leak is coming down the walls, that's a good sign that it's probably coming from the flashing, because that means it's getting behind the flashing, coming down the wall, and where you're seeing it is on the wall inside the home, and it's usually coming down from the ceiling. If the leak is coming from inside the chimney, there's a couple more reasons why that may be occurring. If it's an older brick chimney, a lot of the times that mortar can start to fall out and it can be unsealed, meaning whenever it rains pretty hard or you have wind-driven rain, it's getting inside those cracks and it's coming all the way down, and then that's why you're starting to see it inside the chimney. The second reason that I've seen this occur is because your chimney cap just needs to be replaced. Meaning what is happening at the chimney cap is it's starting to pool water. That metal is just either dented in, it's been impacted, it's just been worn down over time. And once it starts to pool water, even though it's sealed around that flue, eventually that water just sitting there is going to start to seep through. And a lot of the times it's not something that can just be taken up and popped off. It's usually something that's got to be replaced. When I run into these scenarios and we end up replacing the chimney cap, they're usually pretty old by that point. So that's my quick leak guide. This is something you can usually do by just going inside of your attic, taking a peek, trying to find out where that area is. If it's a very tough spot to get to, consult a professional. Don't go climbing all over your roof, especially if it's steep or a two-story. That's where I would recommend calling somebody like myself or another professional if it's an HVAC. Thanks for watching, guys.